awkward moment of trying to drag everyone in from the hall. They'll be back shortly. So just to remind you, the agenda for the remainder of the day, we're going to transpose two sessions. We're first going to have the Executive Director report and then the Management Council and Board of Directors update for a reason that will become clear in a moment. That will last until 4 o'clock. Then we will have committee reports on action items from 4 till 4:30. And then those of you who aren't chairs can adjourn and prepare yourselves for the social hour. Those of you who are will be joining us here on site for the chairs meeting and debrief. So, Kay, are we still waiting for a few people, or are we good? We good to go?
I can't get them people to stop talking.
So actually, it's excellent. Ms. Okay informs me that she can't get people in one of the committee breakout rooms to stop talking. It's good news, right? Not being able to drag people away from work. That means that we have an enthusiastic and engaged membership here at the IDESG. By the way, I know that these proceedings are hard to tear your eyes away from, but do check out Twitter and some of the online news. There's some fairly hilarious April Fool's stuff going on if you get a few moments free. So thanks, everybody, for participating enthusiastically in the committee breakouts. I sat in briefly on two of them. I think the discussions are going along very well. And without further ado, I will pass the microphone to Kay Shepard-Kahn, who is going to give us the Executive Director update. Kay.
Thanks, Bob. You'll see on the agenda that I have a fairly short update. I just wanted to make sure, I always try to make sure that you have the information about the next plenary. We've been able to do these quarterly in person, and we want to continue to do that. And so, John, can you advance slides for me? Okay, so the next plenary is in June 17th to 19th. That's a Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. We will start the plenary. I think we're going to continue with the model that we have here and that we've done for the last couple of plenaries. It seems to work pretty well. It allows some other meetings to happen and also for people to travel. So it will begin at 1 p.m. Eastern Time because we are going to be hosted next time by NIST. We will be at their NIST facilities, which are located in Gaithersburg, Maryland, which is in the D.C. metro area. And there'll be more information about this posted on the website, but I wanted to make sure everyone heard while we're all together. And then we will end mid-afternoon like we are here on the 19th, which is a Thursday. The Management Council will meet, we have down here possibly Monday afternoon, but certainly likely Tuesday morning, June 17th, again, as we've done here. Can you go to the next slide for me? Here's a description of where the NIST headquarters are if you've never been there. 20 miles north of Washington, D.C. at the main campus in Maryland. There are several local area hotels. In particular, apparently, the Marriott Courtyard is nearby and is used to ferrying people to and from the NIST facilities. So all of this information will be posted on the website, and we usually wait until we complete one in-person before we start putting up registration and information for the next in-person plenary. So after the June one, we're still working to solidify when the one in the fall will be. The last 2 years we've tried to do that the middle to end of October. We may continue to do that. We've had some folks who have been interested in possibly co-hosting or co-locating, but none of those offers have worked out just yet, so we're going to continue to try to get those logistics work out, and we'll keep you informed as we're able to make those decisions. So that was the main thing that I wanted to report to you about what's coming up, and then I had a special announcement that I needed to make today. It has been a real pleasure and a joy for me to work with all of you and to work on creating this identity ecosystem steering group as an organization, and also working on the framework and all the issues around identity management, which are all brand new to me. And it's been really fascinating and a great experience to work alongside you and to learn so much. But unfortunately, I have been recruited and offered a position as the executive director of the National District Attorneys Association, which is located in Washington, D.C., and I have accepted. And so as of May 1st, I will be moving to that organization. So the month of April is my last month with you all as your executive director. And I just wanted to thank you for working so hard and for helping me and really pitching in and helping each other. It's just been a real joy. And I'm sorry to be leaving you in this position, but I've already been bludgeoned into I have to sign that membership agreement. So you might not actually be completely rid of me, just see me in a different role. So thank you, everyone.
So stay there for a minute because you don't get to walk off quite that fast. So I really want everyone to thank Kay for everything that she's done for this organization. It must have been a very odd experience to walk into the midst of the identity community a year and a half ago, and a whole bunch of people who have known each other, for 15 or 20 years and been talking about these issues. It must have seemed like an alien invasion or something like that. But I think maybe everybody does appreciate the extent to which the success and survival of the organization depended on Kay's efforts. It's, I think, literally true to say that we wouldn't be here today without all of the hard work Kay has done. And the amount of work was literally unbelievable, and she always did it with good humor and a really high degree of performance. So I'd like everybody to give Kay a big hand. We owe an enormous debt. So thank you very much, Kay. And definitely get that membership agreement in. On a lighter note, I'd like to say that I'm really, really happy that my last day will be April 15th, so that I won't be the one responsible for whatever natural or man-made disaster is triggered by our third attempt to meet in the Washington, D.C. area. You'll recall that the first one triggered Hurricane Sandy and the second one shut down the government. So Kim, it's all your fault. And now we have the Management Council Board of Directors update. And I'll introduce Jeremy and Peter to take us through that. Jeremy.
Thanks. Well, I'm actually going to let Peter, as the chair, deliver most of it. But I wanted to answer the one question that some of you may be asking yourself now, which is, oh, crap, Kay's leaving. Now what? There's sort of a couple of aspects of it. So the current grant that this organization is being operated under, the Trusted Federal Systems, is expected to run right through just after the plenary. I think we'll make the transition to a grant to IDESG Incorporated around July, as I talked about earlier. Kay came to us through TFS. I don't think many of us actually knew her before the first meeting in Chicago. And in the interim, for the next 3 to 4 months, while the existing grant is still in place, we'll basically be working. It'll be TFS's responsibility to provide resources, hopefully one very good person to I don't know if it's possible to fill Kay's shoes, but to do the best that they can. And I actually, not to sound too pessimistic about it, I've already been talking with Sudhi Umarji from TFS. He's talked about a couple of potential candidates, and I'm actually quite encouraged by how well we may be able to actually make it through this transition. Longer term, because we're transitioning the structure of how this organization is funded from essentially hiring an organization to convene it to making a direct grant to IDESG Inc. itself, the question of who steps in as the next executive director is really a question for the board of directors of the organization, who happen to be the same people who have been part of the management council. And so the one thing I can share is we talked earlier today about, starting to think about what steps the organization actually wants to take at that level to go through the process of actually selecting somebody to sit in this role in IDESG Inc. And it was, I would say, a good conversation, and there wasn't a firm decision that was made other than everybody knows this is something that's very much going to be an early responsibility of being a board member of the organization. So to those who are about to get sworn in April 15th as new members, and I know there's a few, congratulations. So with that, let me hand it over to Peter to talk more about other items.
Thanks, Jeremy. Yes, indeed, we had our oh crap moment last night and this morning when discussing this, but let's just say it's just added one more dimension of spice to a rather rich mixture already of stuff, of responsibilities that we have as a management council and a board. If you recall, if you cast your minds back to January, the last plenary we had in Atlanta, we already raised another issue that we sort of realised as the election process started for the elections which have now been concluded with the election or re-election of many management council members and a couple of new people. And that is that within our rules of procedure, we have a provision of a 2-year term limit, which basically means unless we do something, we're going to have an even bigger oh crap moment when it comes to the election cycle next year, which means that of our newly minted management council, 13 of them are going to have to step down, and there'll only be 3 people able to continue the transition, having served only 1 term. So we said, we highlighted this already in January and said that this should be part of a not too deep, but nonetheless thorough review of some of the provisions that we have in the rules of procedure that we very diligently worked through in terms of establishing the operational and organisational culture of the organisation, to review those after a year or more of operation to see which elements are still appropriate and to try and trim back things where we think we may have been a little overzealous in our governance processes. And already at the January plenary meeting, we gave an undertaking that the Management Council would start a reflection on this whole process and to come forward with some recommendations, first of all through a discussion forum with plenary members, and then a more detailed discussion at a face-to-face plenary in terms of some recommendations of how we go forward. What we've done is we've taken on a number of things, and there was a suggestion already made, I think it was before the plenary, and it was certainly highlighted by a couple of members at the plenary in Atlanta, the idea that the newly elected and re-elected in many cases management council should have some sort of 1 or 2 day retreat to work together intensely on what their responsibilities are as a management council and as a leadership in terms of the work that to really clarify its own role and its relationship with the committees and with plenary. And just before anybody gets carried away with the idea that we're all going off into some sort of Vegas-style retreat with spa treatments and everything else, the venue is that very attractive building of the Department of Commerce, downtown Washington, D.C., which, although the aquarium is being closed, I don't know, maybe there's still some sharks there, not just on 2 feet. But that's the offer. Is the retreat will take place there. But at the very least, we found and carved out a 2-day period where nearly everybody on the Management Council, both incoming members, retiring members, as well as some of our other officers and colleagues from the INSTIC National Programme Office, are going to be able to sort of get down and dirty for 2 days and get to some of the issues we need to deal with. The issue about rules, structural issues like the problem of election void that we might have next year is only one part of a broader picture, which is the main theme that I want us to look at during those 2 days is the organisation structured and fit for purpose, in the sense that we are starting to get a better and clearer picture of the work that is on the table for us to do, the challenges that we have in the next couple of years. And we need to be really sure that the organisation is structured and starting with the Management Council itself is properly aligned to be able to deliver the very ambitious objectives that we've set out to achieve. So that retreat will be looking at a number of themes which are issues which the plenary itself has asked us to look at. So aside from the rules, looking at the whole positioning of future funding of the organisation. If you'll remember back to, I think, 2 plenaries ago, we had quite a considerable discussion about a strawman proposal we had forward for potential fee structures for the future of the organisation. And there was some pushback from plenary in saying, not too fast, are we sure this is the right sort of structure, the right sort of fee levels? And we took those concerns and criticisms on board seriously, and we want to include that discussion as part of a broader discussion in that retreat about the resourcing of the organization and ensuring that we've got the resources, material, volunteer, financial, that enables us to do the job that we've set ourselves out to do. Another input to that process for the retreat is very much in line with what Jeremy was mentioning this morning, that now that we have a clear green light from NIST for a single-sourced solution for funding, that there is an agreement from NIST that the IDESG as the organisation can be the direct recipient of grant funding in future. The officers, which are myself, Kim Little as treasurer, and Kay for the moment, and we're going to work her to death until the end of the month. Glad she's not listening. The three officers will be working on putting together the material submission for that grant, because although NIST says it's a direct solicitation, it doesn't mean we can just sit back on our laurels and expect the money to roll in. We've got to put together a serious business case and budget and clear outline of our priorities and work that needs to be done. And we take that very seriously, because we feel that there is some dysfunction in the organisation in terms of principally about availability of resources to be able to get work done in the right places. And there is some frustration expressed in a number of committees that they would like to get further in some areas of work, and they just don't have the people power around the table and just from pure voluntary effort to be able to deliver on that. So in terms of and we discussed this in a bit more detail in the Management Council this morning, and we will be discussing it even further more detail at the 2-day retreat, is structuring our response to NIST for in response to that solicitation from NIST for funding for IDESG. We'll be structuring our proposal around 3 broad areas in terms of what we are looking to get funded. The first one is the sort of keep the lights on and establish the basic operational baseline. That starts with assuring a longer-term replacement for K and whatever interim solution we come to with Trusted Federal until their funding runs out in July. We need to carry that over from July onwards and ensure that we've got a minimum core staff, starting with an executive director, who provide the basic operational basis for the organisation. The 2 other areas, one is, I don't want to sort of minimise it, but it's what you could call sort of commoditisable services, in the sense that there are certain infrastructure services, whether it's the website, collaboration tools, online tools, and so on, that may be able to be provided just as a service by a third party. And so we are proposing to do a request for proposals to third-party organisations or companies who provide such sets of tools to see what is the most competitive and most advantageous offer for IDESG to take on and to carry on the collaboration infrastructure issues that are actually core to our operation. And the third part of the response to the solicitation, and I think it's probably in many ways the most important, whether in terms of the total budget or in terms of the impact on the organisation, is what we're calling a framework management office. And by that we mean to have under contract somebody who will manage the provisioning of subject matter experts and expertise to support the work of the committees in delivering the objectives and the deliverables that we as an organisation have set out to achieve. So in these plenaries, when we're outlining what our mid-term and longer-term objectives are, what are the specific pieces of work, the building blocks towards a future identity ecosystem, that we establish as a group that these are the things we want to do, and where committees are struggling to be able to deliver those tasks because of resource shortfalls, we're putting together a proposal that would allow us to be able to work with a third party that would provide subject matter expertise on a sort of on-call basis to help the work of the organisation. And the idea behind that is that although the board will have a responsibility overall for the sort of overall management of that package of money with an external supplier, that the actual demand for specific expertise will be a reflection of the requests coming from the individual committees. So it's not because this was a legitimate concern raised by a number of board members, was, well, are we just going to bring in contractors who are going to tell us what to do and start pushing us around and come in with their own vision of what they think IDESG is going to be about? We've pushed back very clearly on that and said, no, this is going to be a set of resources made available under contract, and which the committees themselves, with due diligence and coordination between the committees and the Management Council, they will be leading and determining the allocation of those resources. And I think that's an attempt from our side to recognise that there are some resource shortfalls at the moment, and that's something we want to try and provide for. In that context, so in 3 weeks' time, we have this 2-day Management Council retreat as input. We've got all these various issues about review of the rules, looking at the response to this solicitation for funding, looking at the dues and funding model. But also in terms of substance, one other aspect which we'll be looking at a little bit touching on tomorrow, and which we had very interesting discussion on in the Management Council meeting this morning, and that is, if you go back to the plenary, I think it was last July, I think Andrew Hughes did a presentation on, what's this identity ecosystem framework conceptually? What is it we're trying to build and develop? And there was a considerable amount of work done in his presentation, taking us so far in the thinking around what the future ecosystem framework would look like. And as a Management Council, we got a sense, well, yes, and so what's the next steps? And although obviously a lot of the committees, and particularly the Trust Framework and Trust Marks Committee has been driving a lot of work there, we found it interesting to get some additional input from the INSTIC National Programme Office, which they presented a little bit this morning, outlining what that might translate into in terms of specific work items and work proposals for the next year. And I think we're going to be looking at that in more detail as well in our 2-day retreat. And the whole objective of that is to be able to come from that meeting back to the plenary with a set of ideas and recommendations for how we should be taking our work forward. In terms of specific outputs then from that work of the Management Council, we have a task which the plenary gave us last November, which is to come back at some point to the plenary with some revised ideas regarding future funding and fee schedule. We think that time is now in terms of, if we have to put together a 2 or 3 year budget in terms of responding to the solicitation made by the INSTIC National Programme Office for funding, then this is the time we should be looking at not only how we develop the organisation over the next couple of years with additional grant support from NIST, but also how we transition away from that funding towards a self-funded and self-sustained model going forward. So we think this is the time for us to be revisiting that issue about the fee schedule, even if they won't kick in the immediate future. We will also then obviously be coming back with proposals to plenary regarding some of the issues about simplification of process and procedures. And I think, again, one of the key elements that I'll be trying to get across is to situate the Management Council not as some sort of overarching and over-imposing body telling the plenary what to do, but to be a real facilitation for driving the work that's coming out of the committees and bring it to maturity and conclusion for plenary to discuss and sign off on. So we'd like to try and come forward with some ideas there, as was requested of us back in November. And another issue which we discussed, and I think we are going to be recommending, is it's all well and good for the Management Council, representing the 16 stakeholder groups, or the 14 stakeholder groups and individual members across the plenary. It's fine for them to have a 2-day period and retreat to discuss their various concerns and see their vision of way things go, but that we should also have an opportunity at the next plenary for the Management Council, together with the chairs and leaderships of all of the committees across IDESG, to take that work even further, because we think the work and the coordination of the work from committees is central to what we're trying to do. So that's one half of what I wanted to report on. So it was all in relation to that sort of work that we're taking on ourselves as a management council. In terms of specific policy work that under our responsibilities, there are 4 items which I wanted to briefly mention in terms of work that's come through Management Council since our last plenary. Those of you at the last plenary remember there was a Birds of the Feather session which looked at the re-energizing of the User Experience Committee, which, although it had drafted a charter and had some initial leadership, never got to the point of getting sign-off and approval by plenary to have their charter approved. And in the meantime, some other ideas were brought up around the under the umbrella term of human trust experience. And although the Birds of a Feather meeting in January was inconclusive in terms of having a definite way forward, we agreed to try and break the impasse a little bit by setting up, under the leadership of Steve Brooke, who's one of the members of the Management Council, to set up a sort of temporary subcommittee of the Management Council to try and eke out some of the concerns around these 2 constituencies and see where we should be taking it forward. And the results, although not definitive today, the advances that have been made is that the User Experience Committee has been sort of restarted. There's a new wave of interest in taking that work forward. And the impression I have is that they will be ready shortly with a revised and simplified charter to come back to Management Council for review before submitting that to plenary for final approval. And the separate area of work under Human Trust Experience, the state of play there is less advanced. They've had less time to discuss and consider the issues that have been brought forward. And there was a request to sort of decouple the 2 areas of work so that the people interested in the work on Human Trust Experience would have more time to mature their thinking and ideas before they come forward to the Management Council with a proposed recommended charter. So that's still work in progress. The second area is from the Policy Coordination Committee. We have a piece of work, and we just actually come out of a breakout session of Policy Committee together with the Financial Services Committee, looking at a document on policy incentives. And I think the general feeling of the Management Council was that this isn't a sort of classic deliverable of IDESG, which requires Management Council review, plenary approval, and so on, but it was more of a sort of iterative process of trying to identify a number of issues around incentivizing the financial industry to get involved and interested in the work we're doing here. And we'll actually hear a bit more from, I think it's Dave Temeshok from the MPO, who will, in Dan Chenok's absence, will speak to that. I think it's after this session. Third area was on use cases. There was a first draft deliverable coming under the authority of the Standards Committee, which has now been through an initial review in the Management Council. And the feeling there was a substantial piece of work done in the use case documents. There's still some questions which need to be answered, and that's part of our due diligence in Management Council to address those. And the Management Council review is underway on that, and they're working together back with the Source Committee before that comes to plenary for further consideration and approval. The final element I would leave on is a question which is under the responsibility of the Management Council, and that's with regard to liaisons with external organisations. As some of you may know, we have a memorandum of understanding, a sort of liaison agreement with the Kantara initiative, and we were approached a couple of months ago by a European trade association very much involved in the identity space called EMA, that approached us and said we would like to establish a liaison agreement with you as well. Before jumping straight into that, we realised that one thing we would need to look at very carefully And it's part of both of our due diligence and our fiduciary responsibility as an organisation to say, well, if we're moving in the next couple of years to a model where we are charging for membership dues, for example, we should be maybe a little cautious, or at least think twice before sort of giving free passes out to liaison to other parties to be able to join the organisation without having to pay any fees. So part of the review we're doing at the moment, although we're giving a sort of green light to the relationship with EMA, because they're not looking for a formal liaison, they're just looking for a sort of more informal exchange of membership for the moment to be able to allow us to participate in their activities and vice versa, that going forward we need a more comprehensive liaison policy that actually identifies what are the various implications of different types of agreements with external organisations. Some of them will be financial implications in terms of potential lost revenue for us in future membership fees, but there are other issues like intellectual property, about how you ensure that if IP has been put on the table and socialised and is under the responsibility collectively of this organisation and covered by our own IP policy, how do you protect that in terms of your relationships with other organisations? So there's those and a couple of other issues around liaison we're looking at, and we're hoping to draft a more comprehensive liaison policy which we can publish to the plenary to give an indication of what our thinking is as a collective leadership in terms of those issues. That's it from me. I think I would like to finish with a big thank you, really, and that is to all the members of the Management Council, particularly those that are retiring, because those who aren't retiring may get some thanks, but they'll also get some tasks coming up in the coming months. But for those members who are retiring, a big thank you for serving on the Management Council until now. It's been a sort of bumpy year, and it's been a transition year. But as I think Kay was very quick to underline this morning, those people who stood for re-election, they did so with their eyes open and with a clear knowledge of what they were going into, because being elected to the Management Council this time also meant accepting full responsibility as being a board member of the organisation and with all the responsibilities that go with that. And only to echo Bob's comments to Kay, and a big thank you again to Kay for all your personal support in keeping me on the straight and narrow, keeping me, like for this session, updated with the information notes so I didn't forget the things that are needed to be covered. Your support for us has been invaluable. And big thank you to everyone who's been working with us on the Management Council in the last year. Thanks.
Thanks, Peter. Are there any questions for Peter from the audience? So, are there any questions online? By the way, do we have access to an audio feed from? Oh, okay. And is there a question online? There is no question online. Okay. Well, in that case, we will begin the next session early. And if I actually switch to today's agenda, the next session is the report outs from a couple of our committees, and I believe the first report out is Adam Madlin reporting out from the Security Committee on the functional elements discussion. Adam.
Thank you. Okay, let's see that this works. It works. We need to switch presentations. Okay. Okay. Hi, everybody. This is Adam. I'm Adam Madlin. We're just going to give a very brief, 15 minutes at most, update after last plenary's the work that we've been accomplished over the last quarter. So I will have my partner in crime up in a little bit as well to do part of the presentation, Mike, as soon as he comes in from wherever he is. So Very good. So again, this will be a very brief overview of the work. If you remember, I think for many of you, we did present the first draft, which we called draft 0 or draft point something, of the functional element deliverable. And we've, I believe, accomplished quite a bit of work since then in the last quarter. After we first displayed it in Atlanta, there was a clamoring, a mini clamoring to get at it. So we put it out there and started sharing it across many committees and made it available for comment and input across most of the committees or anybody who wanted to. So we've accomplished, and we've been focusing on it since then. We've accomplished quite a bit of work since then, but this is a living document, and it's a component of the whole entire functional model that will be put through plenary approval process. So we are going to keep pushing on what I'm about to share with you. So we're going to just talk about what's changed in the functional elements, and then jump into how Mike is going to take over and discuss some of the ways we think that you can use the deliverable that we've put out there. It is out on the Functional Model Wiki for anybody to get at and download and review and provide feedback. This is what we're calling Functional Elements Diagram version 1. This will be a repeat for some of the people that saw this in the previous breakout session. If you recall, it looks quite a bit different than the previous version. So we've made a handful of updates, and what we've done is we collaborated with a number of committees. We received feedback from those committees after their review. We worked jointly with the use case ad hoc group to do a gap analysis against many of the use cases that they are submitting, and work with them to improve both deliverables, to update our functional elements work, and to provide feedback to their use case development work. So we've done that, and we did a gap analysis against many of these use cases to uncover any gaps that we had, found some gaps in our functional element work, in their use cases, and as a result, we've accommodated all the input in the version you're looking at here. So one of the key things just visually that we've eliminated is any sense of a workflow of a specific sequence of activities amongst the core operations. So we are attempting to acknowledge that many of these functions can happen multiple times in the life cycle of online identity workflow or life cycle, and can happen multiple times. So, again, we are attempting to represent the key atomic functions in online identity system. So I essentially covered this. The key, I'll just point out, we've added a new core operation around intermediation for blinding, pseudonymization, and exchange or translation. We've changed some of the terminology we've used to better reflect input and feedback, and we've also added a couple of key functions. I'll point out attribute control is an important one that has been added since the last iteration. So there's more work to be done on the functional model. This is one part, one component. There's more layers. One of the next steps, so we've done this analysis versus this whole series of use cases. We are now going to do an analysis against existing other functional models and other relevant artifacts. And we've done some analysis relative to NSTIC pilot architectures. We're going to continue some of that work to continue to develop the additional layers of the model, which include identifying and describing all the actors that participate and the operations that are involved in a functional model. And so we welcome more more feedback, and we'll consider it in committee, but we are going to be pushing forward with this work. And as we mentioned here, the entire functional model will be a formal deliverable of the committee, but this working part that is the main deliverable to date is just a component of the entire model. So with that, we are making some suggestions and want to start taking it to the next level. And so we've flushed out some thoughts around how you can use this in requirements developments across different committees. And to go into that, Mike will spend just a few minutes. You can use this to advance. Just the arrows here. Okay.
Thanks, Adam. So you've probably heard me say a number of times, and certainly a bunch of other people, okay, what's the point of this, these functional elements, what's the point of this functional model? And so one of those things is to facilitate the process of writing requirements, which has to happen at some point. So I'm guessing that process is going to be something less than smooth, at least at first, and probably quite a bit messy, and that's perfectly okay. So what ways can we facilitate that to look right or be easier? And part of this is that ideally, we know we're going to have multiple committees writing requirements for different types of things. It would be nice if they came out looking similarly, right? Not the requirements themselves, because privacy requirements shouldn't be the same as security requirements, but that they're digestible in the same way, right? So whether that's just formatting or that's just approach to writing them, there are a lot of considerations there. So one of those is, okay, well, let's take these functional elements and see if we can use them to inform the development of identity ecosystem requirements. I think at this point, what we're calling version 1 of the functional elements is ready to be used for that purpose. So if I were doing this, which may end up being the case at least to some extent, helping with, please, all of you, if you don't mind, is to take the derived requirements from the NSTIC, right, which are essentially just copied and pasted, and they don't look so good in terms of how you would ultimately want requirements to look, even if they say the right things, and to take them and take the functional elements and kind of crosswalk them and say, okay, what elements, what functions that occur in an identity ecosystem, right, in any given implementation, do each of these requirements apply to, right? And then, take a first stab at that, try to break these requirements up in a way that makes sense within each of the committees that are writing requirements, and then try to evolve that, and it's going to have to be an iterative process. So the major point is that in the security committee, we think that the functional elements are far enough along to start that process. So if there are changes, it's not like you're going to have to scrap everything and throw it out and start over. It's going to be some very marginal, 5% or less sort of change, I would think. So in terms of what we really mean by requirements development, there's something it's the first piece in the broader foundational, creation of an assessment program. So the assessment program itself has 3 pieces. If requirements development is the first one, then there's also assessment criteria and the assessment process. So assessment criteria is, what are the actual things that you will be assessed against, and then the assessment process is how would an assessment program go about doing that. So the first step in this requirements development is kind of where we are now, right, or closing in on anyway, hopefully in most of the committees, is taking the guiding principles, using those derived requirements, and trying to create something where it is logical and possible to then develop specific assessment criteria against them and to develop mechanisms against them that would make sense in terms of assessment. So let me give just a little bit of an example on what this might look like, right? And so this is an example of a privacy requirement, and I'm speaking on behalf of the security committee, so we picked one outside of the security committee lest it be mistaken for some actual final product. Instead, I'll talk about something that I'm not qualified to talk about, and I'm not even a member of the committee. privacy. So, let's take the attribute verification functional element and ask ourselves a few questions about that. What are the privacy implications, the risks, the harms that are associated with doing attribute verification? Is there unintended exposure of attributes, reuse of verified attributes outside of original collection? How do we deal with these risks? How do we deal with these potential harms? Unauthorized release to third parties, right? So these are kind of the obvious ones here. Next question, all right, how can or should these be mitigated within the identity ecosystem framework? What should we do about the fact that these risks or harms exist? All right, so then there should be appropriate encryption for data at rest and data in transit. That one we picked very specifically because there's definitely some overlap with security, and one would expect that's going to happen. So if you face a situation like that, probably it's not the right approach to punt it and say, let's not talk about that, let's just leave it to the security committee. I'm sure they have it covered. Because that's exactly what the security committee is going to say about privacy, and then we end up with a gap, right? So be inclusive. Really try to cover the gamut of all these things that could potentially be risks or harms. And then, all right, we can mitigate them through privacy policies that are governing attribute use. So these policies must exist. They must be stated, right? And then user notification and consent for attribute use and release. Be clear about it, purpose specification, all these sorts of things, right? So, next question, does something already exist? Do the derived requirements from the NSTIC already address this? And do they do so sufficiently? So these blue bullets here, not necessary to read all of them, but these are 4 of the derived requirements. Some of them are pretty leaky, or some of them are pretty lengthy. And sorry, I just saw the word leakage in quotes and have no idea how that sentence made it into the NSTIC. But these are good. They say very good things, right? Generally, we believe in them. They're part of the FIPS, right? But they may not be very easy to assess against the way that they're currently written. So what can we do about them to make them more useful? So again, just as a suggestion, this is doubtful it will come out like this, but just kind of an example, how to think about this. What can we do to modify them, fill any gaps, or make them more useful in terms of actually eventually having assessment criteria? So looking at that first one, right, organizations shall use privacy-enhancing technology and then it has all these different clauses. Well, all right. This is very simple, right? This is the first thing you should do. Okay, we shouldn't have, just like writing surveys, we shouldn't have double-barreled questions. We probably shouldn't have requirements with too many clauses that, it's very easy to say no to and have no idea which part you're saying no to. So here's a really basic thing, disaggregated into 3 distinct requirements, right? Participants in the IDESG executing the attribute verification must, and now here are 3 bullets instead of these 3 clauses, and so here we have developed 3 requirements. All 3 of these requirements apply to attribute verification. They may also apply to a number of other elements. So map that out. And now instead of writing, this massive list of requirements where 3/4 of them say the same thing, you have a set of requirements that are mapped to the actual functions that occur, right? And so this gives us the minimum possible number of requirements, which is a good thing as long as it's still covering everything that needs to be covered, while applying them everywhere that they need to be applied. So notionally, that's the way that we're thinking about taking that first stab at writing requirements and how the functional elements can help with that. So what do we think are the next steps? Security, standards, privacy, user experience. Are you coming to steal the mic? Did you want to say this? Oh, okay. They're responsible for their respective guiding principle. Again, trying to be inclusive, even if that means a little bit of overlap, that can be solved later. And then, kind of the notional workflow, it's up to the committees to decide, but, if we were to suggest one, review the derived requirements in light of the functional elements, however you want to do that mapping, or if you're just kind of using it to think about things, and, in some cases, maybe that's more appropriate. Identify any gaps, identify any improvements or any modifications to the derived requirements, use that to develop the IDESG requirements. Then at some point, TIFTM's going to have to step in here, right, and kind of make sense of the whole picture. So in some way, and it's up to TIFTM and the rest of us to decide, they're going to need to review these IDESG requirements from each committee, compare them to existing assessment programs, give feedback as to whether they actually make sense as requirements, and it is possible to use them towards assessment criteria. And then IDESG develops eventually a process to create the actual assessment criteria and the assessment program. So 6 easy steps, identity ecosystem framework, bada boom, bada bing.
Just one more slide. I guess maybe I'll just finish up. Thank you, sir.
Thanks.
So we don't need the grant.
So the final slide is just a recap. We have reviewed them with other committees, made it available to anyone to provide feedback. And we are continuing the work of building out the functional model, and next steps are, one of the next steps are to start to use it to develop requirements. We are starting to very carefully look forward to detailing out the work items, the timelines, and over the next short period of time, 2 to 4 weeks, it is my hope to have that all published and available so that you can even track further the specific details of the next 6 months of work of the functional model. And so that's our update from the Functional Model Security Committee.
So before we move on to the next session, I want to do 2 things. First, I want you to stay here because in a minute I'm going to ask for questions. But before I ask for questions, I think it's really important that everybody pay attention to this work. So if we get the model wrong, then we will end up attaching attributes and transactions and what have you to things that are the wrong structure. So I would encourage everybody to take a look at the functional model work as it stands right now, and pick 1 or 2 of your favorite use cases or problems and see whether or not you can shuffle the blocks around in a way that actually builds the structure that you are trying to achieve through participation in IDESG, and see whether there's anything missing, see whether you can figure out what requirements you would lay against these building blocks and forward them on to the committee, and see whether the whole structure makes sense. It might be that some of these things are at the wrong level of granularity and need to be broken up or aggregated. It might be that the boundaries between the ecosystem and its customers or other things are not quite drawn correctly. It might be that the structure is not sufficiently clear that you can tell which element or requirement needs to be levied against. So ask yourselves those questions. Take a look at this, because this will become one of the pictures that people will think of when they think of the ecosystem, and they'll try to figure out where they fit into it. So it's very, very important that we get this right. So don't just sit there and think, oh, good, we just had the update and everything's okay. Okay, everything's not okay until it works for you.
Yeah, I'd just like to echo, we welcome input. This is a living document. We know it's not perfect. And, there were some thoughts that came out even today in our breakout from participants who might have seen it for the first time. And there were some perspectives we hadn't seen. So please get your thoughts and, to us, but even more importantly, start participating in the work. And that way, we can assure that we're addressing any gaps that we might currently have. So please, we welcome a lot more participation. And you can find our meetings weekly on Thursday afternoon on the website.
Yes, that. Okay, so before we move on to the next session, having now both of us encouraged you to think about this and ask questions, are there any questions? Yes.
So once the functional model and requirements are refined and ready for review, what I wanted to ask was, do you envision having different requirements based on case studies? I mean, the different case studies, for example, would the financial services community have a different set of requirements versus the healthcare community versus a semantic or a vendor?
Who can run? Okay, so we have some extra mics. Great, thank you. My current thought, and again, this is my perspective, is that there are likely a core set of requirements that'll impact most of the participants in all areas. But there are clearly some requirements that will need to be documented and, on an industry, on a sector basis or community basis that, we will need to take a look at to make sure they're covered. So yes, the bottom line is yes, there will be unique in a number of key areas.
Judith, and there's a microphone back there.
So this is more of a...
It's on. It's on.
So this is more of a one acknowledging you for where you've gotten to, because I know the effort it took to get here. And where's Mike in the room? The next steps that are coming up, I think, are perfect. So mine is more of a kind of a suggestion comment for how we are then going to take this and socialize it out beyond this room, because I think we are now at a point with a work product that is now needing some input, socializing, and it might be a great outreach opportunity to engage some of those people that have been bystanders looking and waiting for the IDESG to have something to which a comment might be made. Perhaps maybe regionally socializing this, where it's like everybody in Silicon Valley that we want to actually reach out to and say, we want you in the room to make comments about this. Everybody in, Austin that we want to reach out, where we actually target and say, hey, give us an hour. Let us show you what we've done. We want to hear your feedback. So that's just my thought.
Thank you, Judith. I would certainly echo or support the value of doing that. We've talked about that various times, and I think as an organization, we need to figure out how to undertake some of those activities. And I'll just throw it out without getting details. I suspect that going forward with some new activities being undertaken, there'll be some opportunity to do some different things and undertake activities like that. So, we don't want to put it out there and then realize we've missed some big gaps or for some reason it doesn't work. So I would support that.
Yeah, beyond membership.
Yes, and we have to do it as an organization and get the right support to make that most valuable. Are there any other questions? Any questions online?
Oh yes. Do we have anything online? Okay. So all y'all online, we're hoping that you will feel free to speak up and give us the benefit of your input, even though we can't see you in the room. Electronic participation is strongly encouraged. Okay, our next, so thank you, Adam, and thanks to the committee for the work. So our next update is from the Policy Committee on Policy Incentives work, and I believe David Temeshok is going to take us through that. David.
Thank you, Bob. Let's see while we bring this discussion up. Thank you. I'm going to report out quickly on some work that the Policy Committee undertook starting, about a year ago. And one of the things, all the charters are posted, one of the things that the Policy Committee wrote into its charter is to look external to the IDESG, look at policies, look at influences outside, both within but also outside the IDESG that may affect policies within the IDESG or in the identity management realm, and the kinds of policies that the IDESG is advancing through NSTIC and its own initiatives. This particular work project was undertaken as an initiative within the committee to kind of look at what kinds of incentives can be established to spur voluntary participation in the kinds of identity management policy and infrastructure that IDESG and the NSTIC have been about, to pursue that kind of or increase or incent that the voluntary participation of industry, but also to look at, well, are there also incentives that we could be looking at from a policy standpoint that might increase participation of parties in the IDESG itself. And that the goal of this particular work activity was to explore those policy initiatives and be able to present a summary of kinds of initiatives, kinds of policies that might be pursued to increase that type of, or incent that voluntary participation, both within what we're building, but also within the IDESG itself. As a process, the Policy Committee undertook some focused interviews with companies and associations that are interested, quite frankly, in advancing the same kinds of online communities, online commerce, as well as advancing the kinds of principles that we see in the NSTIC guiding principles. The focused interviews were conducted over a period of time by members of the Policy Committee. And this report is really, what we're doing now is synthesizing those interviews, the input from those interviews, into a set of suggestions and recommendations, ideas, we'll call them, for policy initiatives, and that's what we're going to be reporting out on here. Those ideas take the form of general policy suggestions, as well as specific incentives that might be undertaken within the IDESG or externally to the IDESG. And the synthesis of these ideas were framed with the idea that they're kind of directed at government. We see other initiatives looking at cybersecurity and ways to get voluntary incentives within adopting cybersecurity policies and processes. The same type of approach we were looking at for identity management. Are there other ways to incent voluntary participation in identity management best practices or things we could do to encourage that? And with the direction towards government, and particularly towards us in the NSTIC MPO, but also to help advise and inform the IDESG itself, as well as stakeholder groups that are here. Now, the summary report is basically that. It's a summary report. It's not really an official report of the committee or the IDESG, but as I said, it represents the synthesis of the interviews as well as that we had, as well as the discussions that we had within the committee itself, within the policy committee. Now, one of the things that you don't see in those ideas was something that we heard from a number of the interviews, and that was that the need for action is really now. And it's real important that the IDESG publicly, with its public partners, not lose traction. And we're specifically directed from a number of suggestions to help to advance the work of the Outreach Committee to extend its messages about advancing strong identity management both within the IDESG and external communities. Now, the general policy principles that were suggested were, and these might seem like, well, this makes sense, but it makes sense because people were providing this, this input to the groups through the interview process. One, that policy should reinforce the goals and guiding principles of NSTIC. They should make sense. And in fact, that was reinforced. Policy should reflect the business goals and business models of participants in the ecosystem, relying parties and user groups from key industries and communities of interest that are involved and potentially will be involved. Policy should support the development and adoption of concrete and pragmatic performance measures to demonstrate the results. And government should play a major part and reinforce the actions of these policy incentives by setting an example. One, through the types of ongoing government activities that are already underway through the Executive Office cybersecurity initiatives, as well as the NIST's own cybersecurity framework development. And those should, well, help to advance NSTIC as well as the NSTIC incentives. And coordination of identity management, the incentives framework, should be overseen by the NSTIC NPO as kind of guiding through that process, in a position to help facilitate that and help oversee that inclusion in other governmental initiatives. And some specific policy ideas that came in from the process around the trust mark itself, to make the trust mark an industry standard, one that can be recognized for benefit and value and not just for compliance. It seemed very important in the input process that trust marks be recognized for incentives and value that they bring both to the bearer of trust marks, but also to the external communities. Through specific policy recommendation to promote self-regulatory alternatives, including, well, information dissemination about companies in exchange for good management and good practices. And that's also advancing the recognition of those companies. A third recommendation was facilitate easier access to government procurement opportunities. And let me discuss this just a little bit. One of the things that we see in the potential cybersecurity incentives, that work that has gone on for cybersecurity at large, was to look at ways to tie voluntary conformance to those incentives, voluntary adoption, to potentially facilitating grant or government contract works. The same kinds of recommendations were made in terms of identity management activities. To look at ways, explore ways that potentially that type of incentive can be built into government procurement or grant processes. It was looked at as important that some form of liability protection be advanced. It would be a valuable incentive for companies. This was also a recommendation. This and the next one were both suggestions that we also saw in the cybersecurity incentives. And to make sure that we try to include identity management as a component in other cyber insurance schema that's being advanced through potential cybersecurity incentives. Those last two here, 4 and 5, kind of go hand in hand. And this slide presents, and I'm not going to read through them, you can read through those on your own, but this last slide were we'll call it other high-level ideas considered by the committee. These are potentially other ways to look at policy incentives to, again, influence voluntary participation in conformance to IDESG framework, but also participation in the IDESG itself, things that we should be looking at. Now, these recommendations were presented to the Management Council for consideration, both internally for our policy work internally in the IDESG, and also to the NSTIC MPO, to see ways that we could help to advance some of these ideas in other work within the government and outside of it. And one of the things that this segues to is something that Peter brought up. There was a joint committee meeting today between the Policy Committee and the Financial Services Committee. We looked at ways potentially to use IDESG and the advancement of identity management principles and potentially trust marks within the scope of, in the financial services industry, of conformance to the Patriot Act, where financial industry providers have requirements for knowing their customers, obtaining information for account holders to establish accounts, verifying that information. But we've been requested and having discussions with BITS, the the Bankers Roundtable. BITS, the former Bankers Information Technology Secretariat that now is just BITS, right? It just BITS now. But we've had a discussion with BITS to see if there's ways to be able to use federated identity, to be able to use some of the things we've been talking about in sharing attributes and information, as well as some of the incentives that we've been suggesting today, in ways that might enable cost-effective conformance to the requirements of the Patriot Act and the customer information program requirements that have existed now for 10 years for the financial services industry in a way that would help. So we think that's worthy of exploring. We'd like to have further dialogue with the BITS community and examine if there's particular ways that also could be advanced as policy initiatives within the policy committee itself. So with that, Jeremy has something to add.
It just occurred to me as I'm looking at some of the ideas on the screen, just to clarify. So the reason David's delivering the report is Dan Chenuk, who chairs the Privacy Committee, had to stay back on the East Coast, chairs the Policy Committee. Thank you, Peter. However, just to clarify, the ideas that are up there, while it's being delivered by my colleague in the MPO, are not actually government recommendations on policy changes. It simply represents a report on the dialogue that the Policy Committee had with a number of different folks in the private sector suggesting different ideas. So I just would not want any of it to be taken in the context. One of the things NSTIC anticipates is that there will be a lot of policy incentives that may be needed, and the exercise that David is reporting on simply represents, I would say, the first stage in talking to people and asking, what are some ideas that should be considered? But just please don't, I could see some tweets emerging that might suggest that the MPO is suddenly endorsing some major federal policy changes that I wouldn't want the wrong... yeah, no April Fools. This isn't like the Spot Alliance. So anyways, sorry.
So this denial is confirmation. No, in a similar vein, I don't want people to go away with the impression that somehow I'm supporting... What? Oh, sorry, yeah. My apologies. Yeah, in the same vein, I wouldn't want people to go away with the idea that I'm somehow some grand fan of the Patriot Act either. I think what was interesting was there is a requirement which was seen as a burden of compliance for banks for the Section 326 of the Patriot Act to have customer identification programs, know your customer, and everything else, which was originally brought in because of anti-money laundering. In the context of potential funding of terrorist activities. And I think the issue was, okay, you've got this burden on you, how can you turn it around into something that could be an opportunity? And the opportunity being, well, if you've got to know your customer, surely you're then in a position of being a potential identity provider or attribute provider to other parties. Maybe there's a business in there for you to provide identity to others, whether it's competing banks or to other parties. And this was, I think that was the sort of trigger of the discussion about trying to build that out. And I think the interesting thing with BITS is, as an industry group that's really looking about the interface between the financial industry and the whole sort of regulatory infrastructure of government, is to see how building out some sort of common approach to identity and to knowing your customer across banks, how by working together across them, they're actually reducing the overall risk vector for the whole industry. So that there's something, instead of saying, I don't want to do this because the only person that's going to benefit is the bank next door. If I'm providing authentication or identification for somebody else to make business, then why should I be doing? Where's the incentive? And actually turning that argument round, trying to get banks to realize that cooperating together, they're actually helping reduce the overall risk of fraud and everything else as well.
I think there are questions for David. Andrew.
Andrew Hughes. And is this thing on? Let's see. Yep, it's on. So in the vein of Jeremy's comments, yeah, I understand this is not a public policy statement by the federal government. But did the committee discuss that? So if IDESG, as a private sector run organization with loose ties to national programs, made some federal policy recommendations that maybe were enacted. Would IDSG be then tainted with the brush of government? So what if the participants viewed participation of the federal government in a bad way? And it's good or bad, it doesn't matter to us particularly. But was that discussed in the committee? So by IDSG recommending federal policy changes, which perhaps were enacted, that tainted the mandate of IDSG.
I don't think the discussion got quite to that point, Andrew, because, again, this was looking at ideas that might incent participation in the voluntary participation in the identity ecosystem and the IDESG itself. That was really the focus of the discussion. Peter?
Yeah, maybe just one comment, I think, is you can turn that around a little bit as well and say, okay, we as an IDSG, there's loads of great stuff we can do, but if we just leave that to Capitol Hill to solve, we're good to go. I don't think anyone's got an illusion that we can sit on our laurels and just assume that we can do a bunch of stuff and there's a whole area of policy related stuff that somehow is magically going to come out of legislation from the federal government. I mean, I'm speaking as a Brit here, so I can maybe have a little bit of distance here. From where I stand, I don't see it happening. So I think the issue is really looking at, as you say, the policy incentives that can encourage people to join with us, because by working within IDSG, we're actually dealing with a policy deficit from Capitol Hill and actually saying, well, your regulators, you've got your job to do and you've got legislation in place which you have to conform with. We want to turn that around and look at incentives to actually get other stuff done, which is actually furthers our objectives and may actually make it easier for you in the future as well.
Yeah, I think I want to maybe push back a little bit on the premise of the question, right? So one of the reasons the NPO created the organization in the first place was to make suggestions to the federal government for policy incentives that might make the private sector happier and more functional and more enthusiastic participants in an ecosystem. So I think the halo goes in the other direction, right? I think if we're successful in this, we can perhaps bestow a little bit of additional luster on the policy organs of the federal government if they are willing to take up suggestions that we might make, and I hope that we can look forward to that sort of thing happening in the future. Not that we're making any particular suggestions today, or that the government is taking up any particular suggestions today, as Jeremy has already pointed out. Yeah. So, other questions for David? Yes. Go ahead up to the microphone and introduce yourself.
Hi, Scott Lowry. David, could you give an indication of some of the organizations you reached out to, sort of a top 5 list or a top 10 list?
Yeah, I'd be happy to do that, but I would prefer the chairman do that. So, if is Dan on the phone? Yes, he is. Yeah, the chairman of the policy committee is Dan Chenak, and
Dan, if you want to be heard, you can. We'll broadcast you if you want to be.
Sure, that's fine.
Okay, Dave, can you put him on?
He's on.
He should be on. We can hear him.
Hi, can you all hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. So thanks, and thanks, David, for doing a great job on the presentation, and to others for helping with Q&A. So we talked to a number of firms. We also talked to associations who were sort of broadly representative of a number of different firms, including groups like the Chamber and other kinds of business associations. It was not meant to be a scientific sample or a representative sample by any means. It was more sort of just to get some ideas that would spur our thinking as a committee, and then we put those ideas together in a framework that was presented a couple of times throughout the committee, and then as David just presented, kind of the framework was more of a general starting point. The financial discussion that you just had a little bit of a hint of, was sort of the first instantiation of that general framework. And then that would then be worked through a broader set of companies and associations in that sector. And if that model holds, we could then follow through to other sectors. And of course, we would keep the plenary informed all the way along.
So I believe we have a comment from online, right, Kay?
Yes, I need someone to hand me a microphone. This is a comment from David Weitzel, and it's not a question, but it's information I think he wanted to share. He says DHS hosted cyber insurance roundtable reports, and then he gives a link. Do you want me to read the link?
Is it in a fairly human-readable format?
Yeah, actually
Okay.
it is. It's actual words. And
Okay, good. Good, as long as it's not, in Bitly or something.
http://www.dhs.gov/cybersecurity-insurance. Do I need to do that again?
No, I think that's good. It's the DHS website, and it's /publication/cybersecurity-insurance.
Correct.
Speaker?
Okay, so are there more questions in the room or questions or comments online?
Laura?
Dave, you can put Dan online now.
Go ahead.
Dan, you should be on.
Okay,
Laura, you're live in the room.
Okay. Am I live, Bob?
Yes, you are.
Okay. Just on that last point, as a related note, some of you probably followed the DHS incentive discussion that was part of the cybersecurity executive order. And the other point that I wanted to make, since that process was also broadly inclusive of industry, and we worked closely both through the NPO and then I reached out directly to DHS to make sure that we were aligned and they were aware of what we were doing and we could leverage the work that they were doing. And the cybersecurity insurance paper largely came out of that process. So I just wanted to connect the dots for everybody.
Thank you. Anything else in the room or online? So those of you who've been watching me check my phone are probably thinking, that I'm like playing Angry Birds. I'm not. Kay and I communicate by text message so that I can figure out what I'm supposed to do next. But also I've been tweeting a few things from the meeting, and I'm noticing that nobody else is. The hashtag is #IDESG. You should tweet things at it, make a little noise. People should know that we're doing this. So that is it for the group part of the agenda for today. I have a couple of announcements before we adjourn. So we will be having the chair's debrief following this at 4:45. Kay, which room is that in? It's in Blackjack. Blackjack, okay. Okay, so outside security, right? So, okay, so in the Blackjack conference room, we do of course have the social event hosted kindly for us by Symantec. Thank you again, Adam and Symantec for that. And we will be going to the Firehouse Brewery and Grill, which is Kay. Do you have the address for that? Oh, it's on the board. 111 South Murphy Avenue, Sunnyvale. So those of you who are participating online can go there too, if you're in the Bay Area. So that begins at 6 p.m. Hope to see a lot of you there, and we'll see if we can buy Kay enough drinks so that she forgets she took a new job and just comes back and rejoins us. The one other important announcement. So for those of you who form habitual behaviors on the road, you should be aware that although the doors opened here at 7 a.m. today, they won't open until 8 a.m. tomorrow. Our proceedings will start at 8:30. You get an extra half hour of sleep, not courtesy of your iPhone misjudging time zones or anything this year. So we start at 8:30. Continental breakfast will start at 8 a.m. tomorrow. So, Adam, before we wrap, before we wrap for today, is there anything else that you'd like to say, or are we clear on all logistics and other items? Microphone.
Hello? Okay. I don't have anything, but I welcome any feedback, how we can, if anything about today's setup and logistics and that might need adjustments. We still have 2 more days, so please, if you have any thoughts, that would be great. But I hope everybody had a good day today.
And to echo what Adam said, anybody online who has any feedback about the facilities, please get them in, for example, to Kay or to others in the Secretariat, and we will relay them to our crack audio-visual team who are sitting at the back of the room here. Thank you very much, gentlemen. So with that, we're wrapped for the first day. See you tomorrow morning at 8 if you're having breakfast, 8:30 if you're just participating in the meeting. See you tonight at Firehouse Brewery and Grill House at 6 p.m. And if you're a chair, see you in 5 minutes or 15 minutes rather outside in the Blackjack Room. Thank you very much.